Hey guys, welcome to another episode of West Coast Supercars and Classics. I'm Mark. Today I'm going to go over the new Audi E-Tron GT that's just been announced a few days ago. The big question about the Audi E-Tron GT is how it compares to the Porsche Taycan, which has already been out for about a year. Now, a lot of you may know that both cars were co-developed by Audi and Porsche, so they share a lot of the same mechanicals. And the question really is, why would you buy the E-Tron GT over the Taycan or vice versa? What is the difference between the two in general, right? Well, since the new cars come out, we can all see that there's a lot of styling cues which are a lot different from the Taycan. For one thing, if you look at the front of the car, look at the nose there. It's quite different. It's fairly busy. It's got a lot of different composite pieces in there. You see the familiar Audi profile there. They've managed to carve out. The headlights are completely different because, of course, with the Taycan you have kind of a very narrow light, and it has kind of a nostril that comes down to the bottom of each light, whereas the Audi doesn't have that slender piece. It has more of a wide piece, which is a little bit more typical of what you'd see on a conventional car. Audi's also had a different philosophy with their design from way back, because Porsche produces a lot of rear-wheel, rear-engine cars like the 911 series, and even if you look at the Panamera series of cars which are front-engine, Porsche is trying to keep a lot of their design language the same, in that they have that familiar sort of headlight, the oval headlights, and the kind of graceful slope at the front coming down to the low bumper, whereas Audi's gone for more of a bold, chunky look. And you see it through all of their cars, obviously, with a big grille in their conventional gas engine cars. And of course, since they don't need the big radiator grille at the front because this is an electric car, they've tried to replace it with an insert, and they've put their design honeycomb structure in there that's kind of embossed onto the front bumper to make it look similar. It kind of evokes that old look. And you may or may not like that, but they are trying to stay consistent. The other big thing that you're going to notice right away is, when you compare to the Taycan, is that the front hood is much higher on the E-Tron GT. So maybe you'll get a bigger frunk, I don't know. The frunk on the Taycan is it's actually fairly narrow, because the front drive motor is sort of perpendicular to the ground, and it sits behind that frunk. It's quite high, so the thing is, you get a fairly narrow space for the frunk, and because the drive is going to be in the same place on the E-Tron, perhaps because it has a more chunky front end, perhaps you're going to get a little bit more trunk volume there. The other thing you'll notice is that there is less of a fender on either side of the front hood on the E-Tron, because the E-Tron's hood is higher. So if you look at the two cars together, you'll see there's quite a bit of difference in the profile. Let's go to the back of the car quickly now. You'll see again some major differences between the Taycan and the E-Tron GT. Here we're looking at the E-Tron GT, and while the Taycan has a very familiar Porsche rear end that you'll see on a 911, the Audi GT has kind of an interesting sort of an arrow-shaped contour on the rear lens there, and it does have a bar that goes across between the two lenses, right and left. You'll see that familiar sort of elongated honeycomb shape. That's the Audi design language. You'll see that also on the rear bumper there. I like the way it looks. If you look at the bottom half of the rear bumper, the valance and all the arrow in there, that's very similar to the Taycan as well. If you look at the actual opening itself, very similar. Although you do put your license plate down lower on the Taycan. You don't put it up on the rear lid. You actually put it down on that lower valance. So there is a difference there, and also see the design of that lower valance looks different as well. But still, it breaks up the rear end quite nicely, I think, on this car as well. You'll also see some creases in the haunches of the Audi GT at the rear, over the rear wheels, and also at the front. You'll see the creases there that you won't see on the Taycan. What you will see on both cars, quite obviously, if you look carefully at the front wheels, right in front of the front wheels, you'll see a vent on the Taycan and the Audi GT. You'll see it on both cars, it's there. And behind the front wheels, there's another vent, and that vent from the wheel well exits out there alongside the door. Now, an interesting thing I've noticed having the Taycan ourselves is that junk that comes off of your tires when you're driving around, obviously, goes through that vent and ends up hitting the door, so it ends up sticking to the door. So little bits of stuff, you know, mud and dirt and that kind of stuff get onto the door, and I find that kind of annoying, and that exists in both cars. So if you don't like that design, you wouldn't want to have either of these cars, although they're both probably really good cars. So as you can see, the design is quite different front and rear. However, if you look at the side profile of the car, three-quarter view, the front three-quarter view, and also the side profile, you'll see that the roof line is almost identical to the Taycan, right? It has kind of a 911 roof line because that's baked into the way this body structure works, right? Let's start by looking at the interior of the car here. Very different again from the Taycan. I am not an expert on Audi design language by any means, but I really do like the interior of this. Subtle differences and major differences. So you've got the two cup holders. If you look over in the center console, they're linearly placed. Here, if you look carefully, ahead of the cup holders, you will see your drive functions button there on the driver's side, that you can select the different drive modes, and you can also press a park button there. That's the e-brake button. There's also a power button in the center of that main console. Now, if you look at the Taycan, that control is actually up on the dashboard just underneath the main instrument binacle, and it also has a completely different shape. The start-stop button on the Porsche is also on the left of the steering wheel on the dashboard, whereas here on the Audi, obviously, it's on the main console. Now, I don't know exactly how the venting system works on the E-Tron GT, but if you look at the placement, it's obviously the same as that in the Taycan. And in the Taycan, you cannot adjust those vents yourself. There's no thing to kind of press or pull around to change the direction of the vent. It's all done through your main central control on your LCD screen. I don't know if the E-Tron GT is the same, whether it has a screen control or whether you can actually use your hands on that, so I can't answer that question. What I see though is it has a lot more conventional buttons. So if we look at the console here, you can see the buttons including your hazards and various functions along there. And then you can see your climate control buttons above the vents. Again, you don't have those climate control buttons on the Taycan. What you have on the Taycan, which is very, very different from this, replacing all of those buttons on the Taycan, is a flat screen which has haptic controls on it. So that's a completely different system. Moving over to the instrument binacle, it's in front of you just like it is on the Taycan. The shape of the LCD is different. It's obviously got that Audi design language in it, and it is not a curved screen as on the Taycan. As well, I notice here looking at it, it does not appear to have any touch controls on the edges of the screen left and right, whereas on the Taycan you have controls for the lighting on the left, for example, and on the right hand side you have controls for the chassis. You do not have that on the E-Tron GT. The other thing I'm noticing right away, which I'm not sure about in terms of details, is that the steering wheel, while it does have some similarities to the Taycan's, it doesn't appear to have a mode control knob on it as the Taycan's does. So I'm actually not sure where you can access quick controls over your modes. On the Taycan, you have basically a range mode, you have a normal drive mode, sport, and a sport plus, and then a programmable individual mode. And that's done through kind of what we call a Manettino that first came out in Ferrari from racing steering wheels, right? But it does not appear to be here on the E-Tron GT. And also another interesting difference on the E-Tron GT here is that the bottom of the steering wheel is flat rather than the conventional wheel of the Taycan. So those are some other differences. So obviously there's quite a few differences in design, in styling, exterior styling, interior styling. Some of you may really like Audi styling, some of you may like Porsche styling, or maybe both, whatever. But I can see arguments for either car. depending on what your tastes are. Obviously, they're based on the same thing, so they're not going to be radically different mechanically. I don't know about the ride quality and that sort of thing, the ride tuning, chassis tuning that Audi has done, but I'm sure it's different from the Porsches. But let's talk about the mechanicals now. So the base E-Tron GT has the same two motors that the Porsche Taycan has. Now, interestingly enough, both in the base E-Tron GT and also in the RS E-Tron, there is less peak power and less continuous power than in the equivalent Taycan models. Now, if we back up a little bit, you'll realize that the pricing is also a little bit lower on the Audis than on the Porsches. When I say a little bit lower, it's really hard to tell how that will actually pan out, because you're going to configure your car the way you're going to do it. There's all sorts of options on these cars, and I really don't know exactly what the base options are going to be at the various trim levels of the Audi. So let's just assume that the Audi's going to come in a hair under the Porsche models for similar accoutrements, similar configuration. But either way, you cannot get the Audi in either the base trim or the RS e-tron trim. You cannot get it with the same peak power output or continuous power output as the Taycan. And what's happened is that not only did Porsche get to introduce the Taycan last year before the launch of the e-tron GT, so Porsche has a top tier advantage there. Also, in the power department, as I say, they have a top tier advantage. So if you're looking at peak horsepower in the base Taycan, that's 570 in launch mode, which is an overboost mode. And it's like 480 or 490 in regular mode, whereas the base e-tron GT has about 469 horsepower in base mode. That has the same 93.4 kilowatt battery in it as well. Now, unlike the Taycan Turbo and Turbo S, the RS e-tron only has one power configuration, and that is 590 horsepower max and 637 horsepower in overboost. Now, if you compare to the Taycan has 616 horsepower in continuous mode versus that 590. It has 670 in launch mode and 750 in launch mode if you go to the Turbo S. So they've given you the same rear motor, but they've given you more launch control power and they've given you more continuous power in the Taycan versions, okay? So that will obviously affect the acceleration figures, which is why you're seeing slightly slower acceleration in the Audi e-tron GT than you are with the Taycan models. So suffice to say, there isn't going to be an Audi e-tron GT model which is going to accelerate faster than a current Tesla Model S, Raven, or whatever it is, Cheetah stance that's available at the moment. So this just demonstrates that Porsche is going to be at the top of the tiers in terms of the manufacturers, even though they're sharing technology and co-developing. And that differentiates the models. So you cannot just get a cheaper Taycan from Audi. In other words, you can't do that. It's not the same car. And I've realized a long time ago that even though both of them were going to have similar things in suspension, that Porsche engineers are not going to be doing the same thing as Audi engineers necessarily. So you can't really make an assumption that they're the same car. They're not the same car. They do share the same 800 volt electrical architecture, and that architecture allows the battery to replenish from 5 to 80% in about 22.5 minutes. Now, personally, I haven't seen that on the road. I have not seen that performance charging up on my Taycan. I went to a fast DC charger, but I did not get like 200. I didn't even get the fast charger's maximum of 200 kilowatt charging on that one. I got about 50 kilowatts. So personally, I would like to just go and see what the maximum kilowatts are if I go up to a Porsche charger or something like that. That would be fun. But technically, you should be able to do that at the same rate on your Audi or your Porsche. From your normal ride height, you can go almost down an inch on the e-tron GT, and you can go up 0.8 of an inch for your kind of, weird parking lot entrances and maybe potholed roads and stuff like that you want to go over from time to time. And there's something that's interesting that the E-Tron GT has that you can't get on the Taycan that I know of, which is a carbon roof. I like that. Personally, we have the glass roof on the Taycan and we love it. I highly recommend it. I don't really care whether it has a little extra weight or not. I'm not trying to win lap times on a track day or something. So I really appreciate having the extra, and so will your rear passengers appreciate having that rear light and rear view at the back of your car if you have the glass roof. Personally, I don't have a huge love for the sports sound. Driving an EV means that it's quiet. So I don't really have an obsession with trying to get the sound back. I just like to drive around. I like the quietness and the power delivery. That totally, for me, is satisfying, and I don't have to have an electronic sound to compensate for the gas engine that isn't there anymore. I mean, honestly, once you actually drive this type of car, the performance is so astounding and so fun that I don't really care that it doesn't have a gas engine anymore. I love the power delivery, the instant torque. I love the way they put power down through all the wheels. The fact that the thing is so precise, the way the suspensions feel, the low center of gravity, those are fantastic things. And I've driven a lot of nice cars, owned lots of nice cars. These things are amazing to drive. They really are. The question between the Audi e-tron GT and the Porsche Taycan is in some ways kind of academic, because they're both premium cars, they're both luxurious, they're going to be super fast. The pricing is similar but slightly less in the Audis, and it might be a little bit confusing that you have these related products coming from the same parent manufacturer. However, I do think that it gives the consumer more choice on the market. It also establishes the credibility of ultra high performance EVs in the marketplace right now. They are very desirable, stylish, very high performance. They make no excuses for what they are. And I think as such, they can be recommended very highly for anybody who enjoys luxury premium performance cars. So happy hunting if you're looking for an Audi or a Porsche, and let me know in the comments below what you think about the styling and the technical specs on both cars, and we look forward to seeing the Audi on the road soon. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and hit the bell button.